Good evening, friends, or good morning if you're somewhere else other than this latitude or longitude, right? Which is Empty Cloud Monastery in West Orange, New Jersey. And welcome to Monk Chat, where you can ask all the questions you like, or at least a few questions that you like, and we'll try our best to answer them. So I am Ayasoma, and to my left there is Bhante Mamuto, and to my right there is Bhante Sumano. And then in presence and spirit, not presence, in absence of present, but in spirit, is Bhante Sudaso, who is actually on personal retreat for those who are wondering.
He's in the upward direction. He's right above us.
Yeah, he is present. Just there is some cement, different things in between us. So he's currently on personal retreat, and he will be on personal retreat until the end of next week. So if you're dying to see Bhante Sudaso, you'll have to wait. All right, I see that the live chat is already full of exciting comments, so perhaps we can start straight away. So for those who are new, feel free to type in the live chat any questions you have, and myself and the monastics will try our best to answer them. All right, so Elaine says, hello, everyone. Hello, Elaine. Ayasoma. Please tell Stan I'm leading by example and not eating anything tonight after 7 p.m. Your turn, Stan. Stan, stop murdering sentient beings.
You can hear him just in the other room chasing something.
Stan, it's your turn now. Okay.
It's funny that you led the chat with that.
Yeah. Exactly. And you're in tune, in sync with Stan's whereabouts. And Gabriella says, good evening, Venerables. I hope you're all healthy and are getting on well. Trying our best. Mm-hmm. Hello to Ned. And Elaine says, so September 25th in 2012, my mom died. September 25, 2014, my grandson was still born. Aww. Is there a way I could learn where these lived ones were reborn?
Yes. I mean, it's said that those with psychic powers can just apply their minds. And this is something I've heard from many people who cultivate the jhanas. The basis for psychic power is that you can pose your mind a question and just wait. And the mind is vast, and its ability to access information is unparalleled. So you just ask the question, and then something will start to materialize. So there are people who could do this. I can't help you find them, though. I don't know. It's the same mind. So in theory, you could get into a state of calm and concentration and just ask the question and see what comes to you. But if there's still greed, hatred, and delusion, it's hard to trust the data that's coming in. So I would say you just have to kind of let it go. But it's the same if you went to a psychic, like whatever they might be able to tell you, you would have to just take it with a grain of salt. Like they're also subject to greed, hatred, and delusion. So the reality is it's very hard to know how other beings have fared on until very late stages in the practice, probably at the point where you probably won't have the same degree of attachment to the answer.
Right. And Gabriella says, after rereading the Relay Chariot Sutta, I was confused by purification of the variety of paths and the practice. Can you explain? Apologies for the painful Pali words. Well, I haven't read them out loud anyway, but I'm terrible at putting them in my own words. So I usually just leave them untranslated since I'm not perfect at English as it is. Well, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. So any volunteers?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Confused by the purification of the variety of paths, magga magganyananadasana visuddhatam and patipadana dasana visuddhatam.
Okay. Magga magganyanadasana visuddhatam. So the path through knowledge and vision, the purification of knowledge and vision, and the practice, patipadanyana. Can you explain? No.
So copy and paste this question for next week's monk chat, where Bhante Sudaso will be back, and he will. Yes, and he will be able to answer your question proficiently.
Yeah, so there are monks in the Mahasi Sayadaw, or the Burmese tradition, that draw heavily from the commentarial works where they discussed these Jnanadasana Visuddhis. We're just not super informed about that.
Yeah, but copy and paste it on the chat for next week, and we'll see if Bhante Sudaso can give a better answer than our answer, or lack of thereof. Dear Venerables, what are the jhana factors?
You know this one.
I am terrible at answering these questions. I like experiential questions.
Yeah, that's why the chat is blowing up tonight.
Theory.
The jhana factors, there's many different answers to that, because jhanas are presented in many different ways in just the suttas, not to say anything of what came after the Buddha's lifetime. But the basic jhana factors are vitakka and vichara, and these are present in the first jhana. All the factors are present in the first jhana, but these are the main factors of the first jhana. Then we have piti and sukha, and piti tends to be the predominant factor in the second jhana, whereas sukha is the predominant factor in the third jhana. And then in the fourth jhana, we have upekkha, equanimity. Often in some of the lists, but not in all of the lists, ekaggata is mentioned, and this is one-pointedness of mind. So, yeah. And what do those mean? That's going to take a lot of study and investigation. Vitakka and vichara are the two aspects of the mind, of putting your mind on a topic, whereas vichara is the kind of passive experience of coming to know an object from multiple angles. So it's like consideration. Piti is a sort of rising, very bubbly kind of energy. Sukha is a very calm kind of settling in the body. And upekkha is a sense of complete steadiness of mind. You can perceive even really scary or troubling or emotionally sensitive subjects with a mind that's stabilized in the jhana factors. You can look at it without being shaken by it. So this is why the jhanas are put forth as really useful for investigation. You can actually get into the stuff in your subconscious and just look at why you do what you do without shying away from anything.
Great, thank you, Bhante. Gabriela has another question. In the Salt Crystal Sutta, the Conch Horn Sutta, and Body Born of Deeds Sutta, it says that we can hasten and dampen the development of karma to purify deeds with metta practice. But what are the ways we can purify the mind, view, and actions? You're nodding.
Although I have to say I'm not quite sure I understand the question about view. So what are the ways we can purify the mind, view, and actions? So I'll address maybe mind and actions, and then maybe if you can clarify what you mean by view, unless I somehow answer it. Anyway, yeah, so like you mentioned in those suttas, the Buddha talks about cultivating a mind of loving kindness, and not just loving kindness, actually, all the Brahma Viharas. Because when your mind is expansive, boundless, filled with compassion and kindness for all beings, filled with joy, filled with this unshakable equanimity, then when the results of your karma ripen, it's like a drop of salt in a huge, you could say, lake, a huge body of fresh water. So when the mind is calm, when the mind is happy, then it's much easier to handle the difficulties of life, which you can sort of view in some ways as the ripening of negative karma. So you can reflect for yourself, maybe. So I think we've all had some experience with illness. And, what is that experience like when the mind is light, uncluttered, relaxed, and calm? And what's the experience of illness when the mind is stressed, when there's things that need to be done, there's places that we need to go, we have so many responsibilities, this person's annoying us, that person's annoying us, we have no moment, no time for ourselves, much less for our experience of pain. And so naturally, it's a much more difficult situation to handle. But if we, for example, experience pain during a meditation retreat, then all of a sudden there's all these conditions where we can look at that pain in this sort of safe bubble. And the bubble is a bubble of equanimity, compassion, loving kindness, joy. So in terms of how you can purify the mind and your actions, well, follow the Noble Eightfold Path. That one was easy. So your actions come from your mind. Your speech comes from the mind. So if you want to pick somewhere to start, you can start with the mind and everything else will follow. And it just goes back to right intention. So being intent on harmlessness, intent on loving kindness, being intent on letting go. And so when you have all of these qualities in your mind, then it's so much easier to follow the precepts, to treat others with kindness and respect, and to do things that don't just come from a place of reactivity, but rather comes from a place of wisdom, from a place of seeing what the conditions are, and in some ways foreseeing how our actions are going to play out in the world. It's not perfect, obviously. We can do things where we think we have the right intention, and then it turns out otherwise. But then we just learn from that. We can see, I thought that I was doing this and that it would turn out well, but it didn't. But I've learned, and now I can, try something different or pay attention more closely, so that in the future, my actions will be even purer, even more wholesome. And just like Ayasoma spoke about this morning, we can do so in a way that isn't just bound up in what we want and how we can get our needs and wants satisfied, but rather what's best for everyone involved.
Great, thank you, Bante. And Shadow of Label, that's a nice nickname, says, what happens when the 3 dantians are lit up? I have no idea what the 3 dantians are, so...
Dantian.
Dantian. These are 3 energy centers. They're talked about in Qigong, I think. Well, I know of one, but I don't actually, and that's the one that we consider as our center of gravity. But in terms of like the other 2 and having them lit up, no, that sounds like mixing of like the Hindu, the Ayurvedic kind of chakra system with the Chinese meridians. I mean, that's some sort of fusion I've never even heard of before. So, I mean, wherever you heard it, that's where you should be asking these questions. Like we might light them up in our meditation, but if it happens, it happens. Probably not aiming for it.
All right. And Gabriela says, great. I think about the questions about great for Bhante Sudha. So poor you guys, forgive me for my difficult questions. You are forgiven. Especially today, I have such a strong, big headache. I was like, oh wow, this is getting worse. The 3 tians. What is this? Dantians. My head is about to explode in 3 parts. In 3 dantians. All right. Good to see you, Mary, Jacqueline, and John, and Bhante Aloka.
Hello, Mary, here's your statue here. So right there next to this other unnamed.
Yes, so she's saying, thank you for displaying my statue. Very special to me, great. And Bhante Aloka says, Idipada, how 4 are different if they are the functions of Chitta? For example, Chanda Idipada, person who has Chanda to achieve something will obviously put in effort. So how does he differ from someone with Virya Idipada? Can you give similes and analogies to show difference between these forms? I'll also pass this on to...
You can start.
So when the Buddha talks about the Idipadas, he uses a particular phrase, and it deals with a concentration of effort and intentionality around X. And he uses that same phrase for each of the 4 Idipada. For people who don't know Pali, the Idipada are the basis of success or the paths to spiritual power. Iti was synonymous with spiritual psychic potency. But in a more modern day context, Iti is taken to be any form of success. So the Idipada are actually taught in Thailand to business people, how to be successful in their business endeavors, the things that you have to concentrate on. So we use that idea of concentrating, but it just means you take something that is dispersed and you narrow it down. So when you take the first Idipada of Chanda, I like to translate this as interest. You take in the beginning when this is undeveloped, your interest is just wandering. You might be interested in the food that you're eating, but after a few bites, you start to drift off, and you're thinking of something you got to do later. Before you know it, you're done with the meal, and you've been lost. You've been off in another world. Even if it was a really good meal, you're maybe only with it for a portion of the time. So if you start to develop the Idipada, you start to develop your ability to be really interested in what is right in front of you, and to not wander, to not be dispersed. And you also concentrate your ability to apply this to a particular subject. So if you decide, today I'm going to concentrate on the recollection of skin. And so you're thinking about skin, and you're starting to take an interest in it. You're like, oh, it's kind of greasy. Oh, there's little hairs coming out of it. Oh my God, my whole body is a bag of skin. Before you know it, you're totally immersed in this contemplation of skin and really interested in it. Your mind is not thinking about anything else. Now you can see, if you can apply yourself to a topic with that sort of intensity, then you're going to start to have insights, because your mind is not dispersed, it's focused. Now, virya is obviously present, but it's not necessarily concentrated. So the second base of the Idipada, to develop your ability to apply energy to it, is even though you might be really interested in, say, skin, your energy is going to wax and wane, from 1 minute to the next. In 1 minute you're going to be like, oh yeah, look, it's all stretchy, and then you're like, yeah, skinny skin. You're still thinking about skin, you're interested in skin, but your mind's energy is starting to subside. It was peaked for a minute, but then it's kind of like, oh yeah, skin, and it starts to go a little bit dim. But if you develop the ability to have sustained energy or concentration of energy, then that's actually starting to talk about jhana factors. It's when you're not only like interested in the subject, but there's so much piti and sukha in the mind, that you're loving the experience. Like the energy brings up piti, and it brings up this sense of you don't want to be doing anything else, and you could be doing this all day at the same level of intensity. Like when piti is there, you never think, oh, I'm tired of this. Piti is the opposite of being tired. And so that's the second iddhipada. And I pass the rest of it over to Bhante Sumno.
You should keep going.
I really like the iddhipada. I really connected with that teaching because I really saw in my mind when I started that my interest was all dispersed. And I'm like, oh, if I can just develop my ability to be interested in what I'm trying to contemplate, then I'm going to be more effective in my meditation. I'm a little vague what chitta is. I equate it to maybe having a sense of like wholehearted participation, or like really connecting with what you're interested in. So it's one thing to be interested in skin as like a topic of study, but it's quite another to really to connect with it as like your skin. The sense of your consciousness is like really it feels the sense of being immersed in the subject. This is not something external to you, but you're getting the whole variety of experience involved with skin, like from the time you're a baby and your skin is soft to the time that you're old and your skin is wrinkled and sagging on your bones. The mind can encompass a subject with such depth and density that you're getting all of that at once. You understand that one topic of skin contains all of those elements at the same time. Like one example that said, if you truly know a tree, then you know the whole forest. It's like getting to know a tree so well that you understand how it grew, why it grew, what factors affected its growth. And then you start to understand each tree in the forest went through the same processes. Now, the fourth one, vimamsa, is absolutely fundamental to our practice. Like we can do the other three, but at some point we have to stop and look and say, okay, I wanted to get this particular result. Did I get it? And most people, they go into a breath meditation and they're trying to be mindful, and suddenly a bright light appears. And they're like, this is awesome. This is awesome. I'm doing it. I'm getting it. My meditation is succeeding. But actually, if they applied vimamsa, they would realize that their goal had been to start to develop mindfulness, and that their mindfulness had gotten derailed the moment that light had come up. So vimamsa is the base of concentration and concentration of energy, where we can continually go back and we say, if I'm going to get better at applying my mind, I have to study cause and effect. I have to study, okay, I tried to do this and I got this result. I tried to do this and I got that result. So if I want this result, I've got to do this. If I want that result, I've got to do this. And when you start to understand that, then you become master of your mind. You know exactly what you have to do to get from point A to point B. And those are the four iddhipada in a nutshell.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And Andre is asking, can you explain the distinct realities and distinctive natures between feeling, body, and awareness?
Heart. This is experiential,
yeah. Yeah, I can answer this. So that, or I'll try my mind is a little bit foggy at the moment, but I'll try my best so that we can get some insight on how we can investigate and separate these entities, as opposed to taking them all to be the same and oneself. So, Andre, first of all, congratulations on realizing that actually you're taking them all to be the same and oneself. That's a very great starting point, because then we actually already know that there is some work that needs to be done, and we can have a sort of term of comparison as we proceed with our practice. So when we're developing our mind in meditation practice, we can start by breaking down our experience by observing the different components. First, contemplating what are these components, and then looking at our experience and saying, how can this be connected to the theory? So I was struggling a lot actually during our retreat because I couldn't distinguish. So I had the theory, nailed down about, for example, Vedana that we were talking about the other day. So feeling, pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and what we call neutral feeling, so neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling, and the body and the mind. But I was just like, but how can we have an experience of the body that is unrelated to pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral? So I spent actually an entire retreat obsessing about that. In a good way. So not intellectually, but really looking deeply at my experience. And when we look, so there's certain stages actually during, especially a meditation retreat, where we sit down, we are present with our body, and then pain arrives. And I feel like that's when pain starts appearing in our experience during meditation retreats. It's so strong and we cannot avoid it. And it really makes it creates a big opportunity for us to investigate this matter fully. And most of the time, actually, my mind is very difficult today. I have a lot of compassion right now for Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, who suffers from chronic headaches, and I have a mild headache now, and I can't function properly. But he actually suffers from severe chronic headaches, and he still teaches unless he's bedridden. But lots of compassion for Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. But anyway. So can we, when we look at ourselves, like right now, that there is no meditation practice involved, do we have a sense that there is a body? Can we just feel it without any kind of connotation, without any type of sort of labeling? And the answer is absolutely yes. Even if our mindfulness is imperceptible or very weakly developed, we have a sense of the material form. And we can develop it more and more by, for example, practicing the four elements meditation. And so the contemplation of the earth element is extremely useful to develop an awareness of the form of the body, of the sort of solidity of the body. And then all the different other components, the other subjects of experience of the body. So the heat element, the wind element, and the water element. And it's only at a later stage that not at a later stage, but actually it kind of happens at the same time, but there is the sort of solidity of the body, and then there's how we experience the body, which produces a sensation. And those sensations are impermanent, are constantly changing. Something that can produce a pleasant sensation, for example, in meditation, as soon as we sit, after a while can become very unpleasant, or can switch to neutral. And in all of these stages, the mind will start reacting to it with either obsession. So if it's pleasant, we want more of it. If it's unpleasant, we start producing aversion and creating that kind of, I don't want this, I don't like this, it has to stop. And if it's neutral, we are either completely oblivious of it and start veering then towards aversion, because the mind starts getting bored, or we start veering and kind of like, not particularly liking this, or we start veering towards greed, so craving, once again, for a pleasant sensation to arise. So we start fabricating either thoughts, or we start fabricating different, we move in order to, I don't know, make something happen. We start wishing perhaps for pain to happen, have that going on. It's like, oh, please, pain.
Anything.
Come strike me now. This is so dull. I can't take it anymore. And actually, all of this is great because we can start familiarizing the mind with the mind. We can start really understanding how our mind works with anything that happens, with just something as so simple as a sensation, as a physical sensation. And then we can start creating also some power towards how we are experiencing these sensations. And starting to perceive, for example, what we are particularly attached to that we label as pleasant, or that we have a pleasant experience, we can start shifting it as unpleasant in a skillful way, of course, not because we hate ourselves and we want to only have an unpleasant experience, but rather to detach from it. So focusing on the drawbacks of the situation, drawbacks of what obsessing about whatever we like brings. And if we are having an unpleasant, for experiencing an unpleasant feeling, then we can look at the reactions of our mind and make a qualitative assessment. We were actually talking about it earlier this afternoon. The Buddha recommends two ways to do it. Either to perceive it as a dart. So for example, if it's physical pain, so if someone punches us in the stomach, for example, we, instead of then spending an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 3 days, 4 days, a month, lamenting and being in pain, rather perceiving it as a dart. So just acknowledging the unpleasant without adding to it. Or if we are drinking lemon juice without any sugar or water, and we are experiencing an unpleasant sensation, instead of whining and reinforcing the aversion towards it, we can start actually shifting our experience and looking at the pleasant experience. And that's, once again, to balance it out. And there's always pleasant elements in an unpleasant feeling when it gets, for example, to taste. And there's always an unpleasant feeling in the pleasant feeling when it comes to taste. We were talking about the other day about ice cream, that we tend to focus on the cream rather than the ice. So that's a way to balance it out and start becoming more and more obsessed with ice cream. And the same when if there's something astringent or bitter or too spicy, perhaps that it's an unpleasant feeling, we can kind of balance it out to a pleasant. And neutral feeling, looking at it as impermanent. subject to change. And really observing our experience and how the mind relates to it, how we start acknowledging neutral feeling only when it really shifts, because it becomes either pleasant or unpleasant. But instead, we want to observe it, become aware of it, dispel ignorance of it as it is our experience. And that's where we can develop the impermanence. So as we practice in this way, so perhaps using targeted meditations, we can develop an awareness of the sort of single, how you call it, the distinct realities, an awareness of the distinct realities, as you call them. And you can start separating them. So your experience doesn't become a jumbled mess anymore, but rather it becomes something that really explains to you the workings of the mind. And it's something that you can actually act upon, work on, and make progress in. So I hope that answered your question. Feel free to put any follow-up question. Did you want to add something?
No.
Oh, okay. And Danilo is saying, I have been having a bit of a tough time recently with unskillful mind states pervading my mind. Oleaster and Gabriella have helped me identify them as fault-finding and comparative mind states. They make me very angry and upset, uncaring and envious. What I'm asking is, what would you recommend I do to prevent those mind states from arising in the future? I would much rather keep the current loving and happy, wholesome mind states and fall to those unwholesome ones due to stress. I don't understand. I would much rather keep the current loving and happy, wholesome mind state and fall to those unwholesome ones due to stress. And not, I guess you missed a not. I don't think you would rather want to fall due to stress. All right, maybe I'll answer, or I'll share my thoughts on this as well, and then see if the Venerables have anything else to add. So first of all, you said current loving and happy, wholesome mind states. So since it's a current mind state, first of all, it's very important to acknowledge that that is what is currently happening in the mind. You're actually loving and happy and wholesome. You're not fault-finding and comparative. That is not what is currently happening in the mind. So why are you obsessing about something that has happened in the past when that actually is not your current mind state? Very important to not identify with our unwholesome patterns of mind, and also not to identify with our wholesome patterns of mind either, in the sense that neither of these are who we are, but both of these can be cultivated or not cultivated. And most often than not, we unintentionally cultivate and unintentionally not cultivate some. So Buddhist practice, what we want to do is to intentionally intentionally cultivate the wholesome mind states and intentionally not cultivate the unwholesome mind states. And that's what leads us to happiness. So right now, you have wholesome mind states, so cultivate them. Water them. Water your own flowers, as they say in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. So recollect your own goodness, as we say in the Theravada tradition. This is what the Buddha encouraged us to do, to reflect on how much of a good person we are. And not to go like, oh, I'm so great, so much more generous than Bhante Sumano, so much more wise than Bhante Pamutta. That's not the purpose. But rather sit down and go like, oh, actually I did a lot of good deeds today. oh, I cleaned up the monastery, I looked after my spiritual companions, I studied the suttas, I worked, did some things for the monastery. Well done, I meditated, great. There was also some aversion in the mind, you can work on that. So the Buddha encourages us to be aware both of the blemishes of the mind and of the beauty of the mind, so that we intentionally, once again, see what is worthy of cultivating and intentionally see what is worthy of removing, but without going like, oh, I am this ugly person, or I am this angry person, because then we identify with the angry, irritable mind. And it becomes very difficult to let go of it because it's who we are. And if we identify too much with the wholesome qualities, then we think, well, we're going to be a generous person and kind person forever, or a loving person forever. But in reality, we're not, because we're not actually watering the plants. So we might have a beautiful garden right now. Right now by the Buddha, actually, there's some beautiful flowers that were planted. And Venerable Pamutta has been watering them almost every day to keep them nice and lovely. But if we stop watering them, right now we have a beautiful garden, then we won't have a garden anymore, right? The flowers will become sad and dry and die. So those we want to keep watering. And at the same time, we can see, oh, there's some weeds growing, so let me pick the weeds so that they don't overwhelm the garden. And when it comes to gardening, it's very easy to do it because it's something that we don't identify with. We look at it and we can see, we can make a sort of objective assessment. So we want to have the same understanding of our mind and the same proactivity, and really make these assessments without bashing ourselves or without feeling too, too cool about ourselves, right? And that's how fault-finding and comparative mind states shed automatically. And that's because we have removed the conditions for those to arise in the first place. If I see the garden, I don't go like, oh, the garden, so much better than Bante Sumano or Bante Pamuto. No, we have the same garden. So there's no reason. No reason to compare any gardens because we're all sharing the same garden. Do you have anything to add? All right, next question then. Gabriela says 3 of them to clarify. Oh, I think it was. Actually, Bhante Aloka had asked how to develop the 4 Idipadas, but I think you have covered that fully. Yeah. Melinda says, if you practice mindfulness in your everyday life, do you still make kamma? Meaning you're not reacting, but guarding the 6 sense doors? If you practice mindfulness in your everyday life, do you still make kamma? Meaning you're not reacting, but guarding the 6 senses doors?
Still not sure I understand. Maybe if you could rephrase, but the Buddha does talk about different types of karma. So it's also important to point out the distinction between, so in the suttas, karma is actually the intention or the action, and then there's vipaka, the fruits of the action. Usually we use the word karma to mean both or even just the fruits, but it's good to see that there's 2 different sides to that. So the Buddha talks about what is sometimes translated as bright deeds with bright results. dark deeds with dark results, deeds that are both bright and dark with both bright and dark results, and deeds that are neither bright nor dark with neither bright nor dark results. So I don't really understand from your question what exactly you mean, but it sounds like you're asking if by practicing mindfulness, you're either not producing karma or producing karma that's neither bright nor dark, with neither bright nor dark results. So I'm not sure, but I can say that just practicing mindfulness isn't enough. So the Buddha talks about practicing the Noble Eightfold Path as a way of practicing for the end of karma, so to speak. So we're practicing in order to put an end to the actions that lead us to a future rebirth. And those actions can either be wholesome or unwholesome. So similar, actually related to what Ayasoma was saying, if we attach to both sort of the negative aspects of our experience and our actions, then those lead us to bad destinations, you can say. But if we attach ourselves to our wholesome actions and identify with them, then those lead us to good destinations. But the Buddha cautions us when he talks about good destinations, namely the Deva realms, because those two are impermanent. And those two involve not that much sort of coarse dukkha or suffering, but there's still an element of unsatisfactoriness where things aren't quite how we want them to be. So really, we practice the Noble Eightfold Path to become free of that, to become free of all the realms, hell, animal, ghost, human, and Deva realms, to put down this sort of constant wandering around, back and forth, pleasure and pain. So to do that, we have to cultivate the factors of the path. By cultivating those factors, we're putting ourselves in a situation to experience the end of karma, the end of this constant just swerving around back and forth. So when you say if you practice mindfulness in your everyday life, do you still make karma? If by mindfulness you just mean by being aware of what you're doing, then yes, you're still making karma. It could be wholesome or it could be unwholesome. It doesn't matter if you're not reacting per se, or even if you're guarding the sense doors, it's still an action that you're doing with body, speech, or mind. It's just that it may be wholesome or it may be unwholesome. But when we cultivate the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path to fulfillment, when we're not sort of pulled in either direction, when we look at a mind that's still, a mind that is equanimous, then we're getting to that point where we're not generating karma. It's very subtle though, so it's hard to sort of explain, especially just based on your question. But if you could elaborate a bit more.
Okay. And Gabriela is asking, I follow the Noble Eightfold Path as always. Sadhu. How can one make the mind lighter, more malleable, more wieldy? Doing things cleaner, proficient, doing what I intend to do, and correctly, wholesomely?
You already said you're cultivating the Eightfold Path. That's how you do it.
Great. How can I understand this? Sri Lanka says, good evening, Venerables. Haven't seen Naya for such a long time. Missed you. Oh. Well, I missed you too, I guess. So Sri Lanka asks, how can I understand the second bhujanga of investigating of phenomena? Is that what I'm doing when practicing Vipassana meditation? Since you gave us an answer.
I just said something.
Yeah, but I mean,
Okay, I can answer it. Well, it depends on what kind of vipassana meditation you're doing. So vipassana is such a sort of abused term, actually, in so many ways. So it really depends. What are you doing with what you call vipassana meditation? But yes, absolutely. Investigating a phenomena is part of insight practice. So that is definitely cultivated whenever we are understanding our experience. So when we are cultivating insight in the workings of the mind, and we apply the Dhamma to it. If the headache wasn't enough, this also Stan was there to distract me. So let me see, what was your question again? Is that what I'm doing when practicing Vipassana meditation? Once again, if you would send us an email describing what you're doing during your meditation, and then we can actually guide you in the right direction. I think that would be the easiest way to do it. And Gabriela says, for the basis of Viddhipada, you need to first generate desire to develop the Iddhis, Chanda, energetic striving, Virya, to remove bad habits in the present, prevent bad mind states from arising. Then you cultivate the conditions for them to arise and protect the faculties that are there. I don't think it's a question, so it keeps going on. So I think, oh, great. She also recommends a book, so the person who is interested can continue reading. I'll just go quickly because there are apparently a lot of questions. Melinda says, I love being on retreat because of the peace and security, but because I live a solitary life, I find it somewhat difficult to be around a lot of people, and my back hurts a lot, but not at my home. Oh, I hope your back is going to feel better, Melinda. She's asking, can you give me some advice? The way I behave at retreats, it seems like I'm a beginner meditator. I don't think so. We've seen you on retreat. Anyway, there's no such thing as a beginner, intermediate. I mean, we're all beginner meditators until we attain supreme enlightenment, and then we become advanced.
Yeah, and sometimes the retreat environment itself can seem really strict and formal, and it can kind of like bring out a sort of tenseness in us that exacerbates tensions in the body and pain. And we might not take care of ourselves as well as if we were at home. So it's just something to look at. In the retreat environment, you don't necessarily have to be uncomfortable because everybody around you is sitting up all stiff. Pay attention to what really works for you. And this is something I've encouraged a lot of people, is just to develop a confidence of what that is. And that's more so than seeing how straight you're sitting. If the other meditators around notice that you sit down confidently, you get into a posture confidently, and you're meditating clearly because you're not having to deal with a lot of bodily pain, well, that's what's most appropriate in a retreat situation. So you go there to be able to meditate. So really trust your own knowledge of what that is. And if you have to, step out part way and stretch your back, even the Buddha had to do that. There's a lot of instances of the sutta where he's giving a Dhamma talk and he's like, Ananda, you take over, I gotta stretch my back.
All right, thank you, Bante. And Gabriela, you're very kind in your recommendations of medicine, Aleve and naproxen, which I have no idea what they are. Aleve, there you go. And yes, we would love some at the monastery. If anyone wants to donate, that would be, I guess, especially right now, I would love some. Thank you. And James, good to see you. James is asking, is it acceptable to practice perception of impermanence regarding the sense basis as a main practice as often as possible during the day? I would say absolutely yes. In fact, I try to do it myself as much as possible, and I find it very fruitful. It does definitely impact my meditation, my sitting practice, and vice versa, my sitting practice when I contemplate in the impermanence related to the sense basis. It does impact how I perceive then pretty much everything by experiencing during the day. So to me, the answer is not only it's acceptable, it's extremely beneficial. And James says, how far can recollection of virtue take one on the path to awakening?
It can take you far, but not far enough.
There is a Zen answer for you. But I would say that us Westerners, I will just add to that us Westerners should recollect our virtue, but very much practice virtue. Because I would say, myself included, whenever we compare ourselves to the average, actually, Asian layperson, our virtue is on a really low spectrum. So there's lots that needs to be cultivated in order for lots to be recollected. And then that will propel us in the path, because it will have created a great foundation for practice. Incredibly useful.
Just add on that one that Silanusati is given as a very specific practice. And if one were to just limit their minds to what would qualify as Silanusati, then yeah, it wouldn't quite take you all the way. But the reality is, if you're really practicing Silanusati, it's going to connect to other anusati, other recollections that will take you all the way. I can't actually think of any way to practice Silanusati without bringing the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha into it. Because the Sangha is practicing well. The Buddha, one of the main things you reflect about the Buddha was his incredible virtue and the path of practice he took to get to be a fully enlightened Buddha. And the Dhamma is for one whose mind is well directed. I mean, half of the Dhammapada is just talking about the simple reality that it's this Dhamma is only found by one who tames their mind. So Silanusati itself is used, even the Arahants are reflecting, like my virtue is pure and this creates bright mind states. Then they use those bright mind states for all sorts of other reflections and meditations that take you onward. So there's no reason to get tunnel vision about it. It's just one of the tools in your toolbox.
Great. Thank you, Bante, for adding that. And Andre has some beautiful meditation experiences that he's sharing. Thanks for sharing them with us. And Melinda is saying, do you still make karma if you're mindful? It sounded good in my head. LOL. Gabriela says, what are the ways we can purify views? Was one of my questions so as to eliminate wrong views and correct them? I'm doing my best and I'm following the Noble Eightfold Path. Should I try to follow it harder? I love that you're like Adriana. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm cleaning the dishes. Like, they're spotless and clean. Should I make them more spotless and more clean? No, just keep doing what you're doing. Relax. Just relax, to quote Bhante Sudaso. But in terms of what are the ways we can purify views?
The first thing that comes to mind is learn how to not cling to views. So view can be taken like there's always a sort of like perceptual bias in the mind. Like you're seeing things from a certain perspective. It's like built into the mind. But one of the simplest ways to have a purity of view is just not to know that that's happening and to not cling to it, to see views as they arise and see them as they cease, and to see when there's an absence of views, when you don't have a perceptual bias, when you don't have a strong opinion about something, and learn to flow through these states. The more that you learn to flow, the more you create those openings where you're just receiving what is, and you're not trying to have any preconceptions about it. And as far as I understand that, that would be a purification of view. When there is no bias to your view, you're simply perceiving things as they are in front of you without adding any extra data to that experience.
Great, thank you, Bante. And Danilo is saying, at the monastery I attend from time to time, there was one person who meditated with a lot of confidence, almost being with concentration. He was very inspiring. Yeah, that's who we also want to be for others. It's so beautiful when we are inspired by other practitioners, so we can remember also how, whenever we're practicing correctly, we're practicing full-heartedly, how that benefits ourselves and also benefits others. It's interconnected, and how when people around us are practicing with right effort, it also really helps us out, which is why spiritual friends are the entire path. And Shadow of Label is asking, are you guys allowed to eat pizza? Yes, we are.
Yeah.
And in fact, there is a local pizzeria that sometimes people are kind enough to send us some gift cards and offer us pizza. Actually, Jens, our friend Jens, who is watching, just offered pizza. Just sent us a gift card for that. So we're waiting for Bante Sudaso's retreat to be over to enjoy the pizza. So thank you, Jens. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
But it could be said that pizza is not that easy an experience for monastics, because we eat from the period of sunup until midday, and most pizza places are opening just around midday, because that's when pizza is not considered a breakfast food in this country. So it's not every day that we're exposed to things like that. We learn not to be attached. Also, when we do get pizza, sometimes it's not fresh and hot. Like as monastics, we're often not getting the experience of fresh and hot, because we get what's put in our bowl, and then we go back to the monastery, and then we sit down, and then we chant over the food for and this and that, and I will reflect, and not for fun, not for pleasure. By the time we get to the food, it's cold. So it's a totally different experience from what you're probably imagining, like having a slice of fresh hot pizza. It's like, we gave that up.
And Melinda is sharing how she was inspired by May. I think you're referring during the month-long retreat last time you came. May is, in fact, an incredible source of inspiration for me and for many others. So she's our Burmese friend, hardcore meditators. It's like a rock for. There's basically 2 stone statues every time she's present, May and the Buddha Rupa. And yeah, she makes really good karma just by being present. And John is asking, will you be offering the 5-8 precepts for lay people during your Pavarana day? Yes, that will be next Thursday. I believe we are. I mean, I'm saying yes, but
let's do it.
Why not? And then
we do take requests. This is how you be part of the community, even though you're wherever you're at. Like, if we haven't done it before, it's because nobody asked.
Mm-hmm. And Danilo is saying, hey, I bake. If your monastery has an oven, I can make you some pizza, pies, and breads.
You're hired.
Yes, we have an oven, and you're welcome to come anytime to bake. And Secret Spy Records, I don't remember your real name, but I do remember your cool nickname, asks, do you think we sometimes overconsider the idea of merit transferring over immediately to address a problem when what we should actually be doing is considering patience. Do you think we sometimes...
You're pointing at Ayasama?
No.
In
sounds...
the camera, it looks like you're...
No.
Yeah.
Ayasama.
That sounds like a Bhante.
Well, especially because I don't really understand the question, so you can answer it. Do you think we sometimes overconsider the idea of merit transferring over immediately to address a problem when what we should actually be doing is considering patience?
Well, it sounds like you're saying, like, say, I don't know, it's Tuesday and something happens, something bad happens, something we don't like. And then you know that on Friday, the monastery is having a volunteer day. So you think, oh, there's a volunteer day. If I go and help out at the monastery, then this problem I'm having will be solved. So that's what it sounds like what you're saying. It's funny you say sometimes we over-consider that, because I've never considered that. But it is something that I have heard of, sort of people think in that way. Similar to the simile of the salt in a glass versus a lake. But I think it's maybe misusing the metaphor a bit. So in my understanding of the way that karma and giving and merit and generosity works, it's not so much that, let's say I don't know, my stocks aren't doing well. I don't own stocks. But if I were a layperson and had stocks in the stock market and they weren't doing well, and I think, well, maybe if I was more generous to, I don't know, the monastics that live nearby, then I'll get repaid for that generosity by having my stocks increase. But like I was explaining to Melinda, karma is intention. So it's not, the fact that I physically, put whatever it is in someone's bowl, but rather it's that I was letting go and I was giving up and I was thinking of someone else and I was being generous. And that thought, that action of mind that manifested itself through body is what generates wholesome karma. So I would say actually it's almost counterproductive to give with a mind of thinking you'll get something in return. It's not, the worst thing you could do. Obviously, there's some merit there. But then that just sets up the conditions for us to receive something from somebody else that wasn't really given out of generosity, caring, and kindness. And I think we've all received sort of gifts in that way where it was a sort of, the cat's trying to jump on the altar, where we received a gift that was kind of just given to us to satisfy the other person, whether it's to satisfy their need to have a certain status, to be known as the person who gives, or even, you see people who might come around that are performing the motions, doing what a good Buddhist should do, or what they think will repay them in the end. But I think, we can aim for something more and better than that. So I would not so much consider that you can transfer the merit of one action directly to something that's happened for that reason. And also because when we're experiencing the results of past karma, that's what it is. We're experiencing the results of past karma. So the actions that we do in the present don't so much affect what's happened in the past, but rather it helps us to deal with what's coming up. So we cultivate a mind of loving kindness or equanimity when we're experiencing pain or something painful, not because it's sort of undoing what's happening, but rather because it allows us to look at things with a clarity and stability of mind. And we cultivate actions in this moment that are wholesome so that in the future, the actions that ripen will be pleasant, will be joyful. So it's sort of like this interplay. We can't change the past, but we can influence things that are happening in the present, and we can create conditions for new and better, different things to arise in the future.
Great, thank you, Bante. And John is asking, what does full ordination mean to you, and what motivated you to pursue it? Starting from here, going to the
I'm
right.
not qualified yet.
What do you mean? Yes. Oh, full ordination. Okay.
Well, actually, I guess maybe it might qualify. And what does it mean to me?
I mean, Aya Panyavati, so Aya Soma's seminary preceptor, had a wonderful anecdote she shared when two of her novices were getting full ordination. She said she had taken them in, and she had started to get them she had gotten them ordained as novices, and was getting them on track to get bhikkhuni ordination. And at some point, their perspective changed from I'm going to be all about full ordination to, it doesn't matter when I get full ordination. They realized that they were doing what they wanted to be doing. And she said that's when they knew they were ready for full ordination. And I thought that was really neat. My first experience of arriving at the monastery was just that. Like, I was arriving at a monastery where the track to ordination was quite long. It was over 2 years. And within a week of being at the monastery, I accepted that that's where I wanted to be. I was really able to practice well there, and that was all that was important. So it wasn't until much later, and I had more background in the tradition and in the different positions in the community that monks of different status and different seniority had, that I started to be thinking, well, it's about time that I got full ordination, because it lets me participate in the community in different ways. Like somebody who's brand new in full ordination, people know it's like this person's still learning the chanting, they're still learning how to wear their robe, they're getting the basics down. But it's appropriate that you get the full ordination and the time starts to develop and you get comfortable in the position you're at. So if you stay as a novice, then you don't get comfortable in being a fully ordained monastic. Because you can't, because you're not a fully ordained monastic. When you get that ordination, then how you are in the world and the precepts you're keeping and your approach to things is going to be different. And then you start to get comfortable in that. So the first time, I was perfectly ready for it to be gradual, because that was appropriate. Because not just becoming comfortable in being a novice or a bhikkhu, but also becoming comfortable being a practitioner. I was getting used to the Buddhist teaching and what it meant to practice the Eightfold Path every day, all day long. That's something I also had to sink into. Coming back to monasticism after being away for a year and working on getting my health back in order, was a little different. Like, it meant a lot for me to get back to full monasticism because I felt out of place. I didn't feel normal as a layperson, and I didn't feel like I wanted to develop that identity as a layperson. So all the time that I spent out of the monastic robes, I felt like I was an undercover monk. I felt like internally I considered myself a monastic, but I knew that externally there are still these conventions that we pay attention to. And so, there's the internal experience of it, but some of it's just social. So that I knew that until I got full ordination, I was going to be viewed as the novice. So that as people come up to me, they're like, okay, it's just a novice. This is a newbie. They don't know what I've been through. They don't know the decade of experience as a bhikkhu. They could see it eventually if they looked, but some people might not even look. So to me, also acknowledging the social convention was important. Like, I remember at one point, I think a monastic was talking to my former preceptor in California, and he was saying, I don't think I need to become a bhikkhu. I've got a lot of work here to do as a novice. And my preceptor said, um, no, actually, it's important to go forth. Like, if you have the capacity, you have the option. Like, you don't know that you're always going to have that capability, so it's appropriate to continue to develop. Don't get stuck anywhere in your development. When you're ready to move on to the next stage, move on. Because you can also cling to just being in a comfortable, safe little position, where as the next step might be stepping into a whole new world where you'll be challenged in new ways. And that was a really long answer. So there you go. I am sorry.
No, not at all. Thank you for sharing that. So what does full ordination mean to me? Well, it has the same meaning actually to me than novice ordination, and the same meaning of taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Same meaning of just starting to practice with the precepts in Buddhism. So the reason why I decided to go forth has been an evolution of practicing traditional Buddhism and seeing how deeply it affected my mind and my life, and how it made me happier and happier. So my first attempt was when I actually took refuge and I took the 5 precepts. It made a huge impact in my mind and an incredible commitment. It was the first quote unquote religious ceremony or vows that I had taken in my life after baptism. And in Italy, baptism happens when you're like 3 months old. So there wasn't much intentionality on my part, nor do I actually remember the whole ceremony. So taking refuge and taking the 5 precepts made a huge impact on me. And then I was like, let me take the 8 precepts. And then from there, I saw how radical my life shifted, the sort of insights that I had on the workings of my mind. And that created the aspiration to take novice ordination. And, then you become a precept addict. So I was like, oh, great. Now I have 10. Well, yeah, let me get 311. And yeah, so it's a same difference in the way that like my practice just keeps on growing. I keep on having more understanding of my mind and more understanding of where attachment is, or where craving is, or where my sense of identity is laid in. So basically, it creates the good conditions to look at what needs to be worked on and to actively work on, dismantling what needs to be dismantled and nourishing what needs to be nourished, which is fundamentally is the path. So that's what motivated me to pursue it, and what means to me. And there's also this really humbling feeling of entering a path in the shape and form that countless beings have practiced it and have attained complete full enlightenment. So it's really humbling, very beautiful, and you don't have to wait until the end. It's really beautiful in the beginning. So I trust that it's going to be beautiful in the middle and beautiful in the end. So that's my thought. And Bhante Sumano, I don't know if you want to share if you are looking for full ordination, etc.
Well, I don't think the question applies to me as it is now, but it's an exploration. So come to the monastery and ask me in person.
Great. To be continued. ... And Chat of Label asks, how do those that practice celibacy cope with not dating or marrying? We're having a great, as we like to say here in Buddhism. In the first noble truth is like, there is dukkha, so there's a lot of dukkha already in life without having to also go through dating and marrying. So yeah, actually that was another insight of practicing the 8 precepts. And then when I took novice ordination, it was so freeing because all of a sudden I could just relate to people without that lingering idea in the mind that there could be something more than actually a relationship of spiritual friends. So that actually makes for really good, valuable relationships. You stop, objectifying people. People are not anymore something that, even if not, first thing in your mind, but sort of subconsciously, you're not subconsciously objectifying them anymore. So it leaves a lot of room for genuine metta to be developed rather than conditional metta. So those are my 2 cents.
Something comes to mind. It was when Stan was hungering after the cheese on the table. And Ayasoma said, Stan, you've eaten cheese before and you're still a cat. So it didn't make you happy in past lives or even yesterday or the day before. So similar. We've been married countless lifetimes, done the whole dating thing. Maybe in this lifetime, we've been married multiple times too. And yet here we are still roaming around and wandering on. So maybe we can try not doing those things and see what happens.
Yeah, having done both, I had a very serious relationship in the between my 2 monastic periods, and there were a lot of beautiful experiences wrapped up in that. And so that's probably what you think of when you think of dating, when you think of relationships, is you think of the beautiful experiences. But to be really clear with a mind of wisdom, there was plenty of not beautiful experiences too. Plenty of moments of conflict and disrespect and mistrust, and also a lot of the neutral experiences. There's a lot of time when it's just 2 people trying to occupy the same space and realizing that when you're on your own, you have so much more power to sort of create direction for your day. And that helps a lot actually with spiritual practice. So there was a lot of times when spiritual practice was sacrificed in order to create a sort of harmony in relationship. And it kind of got me thinking. It's like, oh yeah, this is why people go forth. This is why people take a vow of celibacy, because it kind of sets you free to pursue what's in your own best interest with a fullness of heart. You don't have to hold anything back for sort of the cohesiveness of any particular relationship. And those relationships that you still have going forward will be improved or edified by your commitment to the spiritual path. So whereas we give up like dating relationships, our family relationships don't get severed when we go forth. They enter a new phase where we start having to relate to our parents and our siblings and sometimes children in new ways. Again, the metta without attachment. And that's a very amazing and engaging process to see how my relationship with my parents and my sisters has grown, and even nephews and nieces. There was such a deeper experience as a monastic than when I was a lay person. It's just, okay, yeah, hey, uncle. But when I was a monastic, it's like Uncle Monk. Uncle Monk sits and he listens and he pays attention. Uncle Monk is not always on his phone. Uncle Monk is very interesting. Let's have a conversation with Uncle Monk. He's obviously somebody who's taking his experience right in front of him very seriously. And so there's an opportunity to have uh, deeper relationships than I found, in dating. Just it's not even. It's so much dukkha and so little actual relationship.
Great, thank you, thank you, Bante. And we have only a couple of minutes left, so we're going to give a few Zen answers. So how many years do you have to wait from samanera to full ordination? Do you get tested on the Dhamma? So this depends on the different communities, different places on earth, different cultures too. So actually in Thailand, it's custom not to do samanera ordination to begin with, to skip and go straight to bhikkhu ordination. Although the bhikkhunis, I think they do samanera ordination. But once again, there it's arbitrary. In Sri Lanka, that I'm aware of, actually, they like to do samanera ordination for several years, but that's also because the monks go to university, I seem to understand, while they are taking samanera ordination. It's the same in Vietnam, in the Mahayana tradition. So it varies from culture to culture. Do you get tested on the Dhamma? It varies from culture to culture, but traditionally my understanding is that a preceptor or your teacher will be the one who will understand and vouch that you're ready to go forth. So it's not that, after, it's not really, we're not getting really degrees. I mean, I know that Buddhist degrees exist, but it's not that the Buddha went to school. It's kind of like art school. Like there is a school, but I don't think Van Gogh went to art school, or did he? Maybe he did, but it's not essential. It can be helpful to learn certain techniques and to have a bit of an understanding, but fundamentally, what we need to understand is the mind. We have to practice, so that's where we get our insights. How many monastics need to be present at the ordination ceremony? 5.
Basic is 5, or 10 or 20.
Mm-hmm.
So it started out a very large number because the Sangha was only located in the Ganges Valley. But as the Sangha started to spread out, you would have these outlying territories where there were far fewer monks. And so the Buddha allowed the number to be reduced to 10. And then there came a point where Mahakachana, a very venerable, one of the great Savakas, was in the south. And it was really hard for him to scrape together 10 bhikkhus for ceremony. And one of his students, named Sona, had to wait many years before he could get the full ordination. And soon after Sona got the ordination, even though he was technically a junior monk, he had been around for so long and yearning to see the Buddha that he wanted to undertake this journey by stages to go and see the Buddha in person. And Mahakachana actually sent him as his representative with a request. Things are different here in the South. Could you adjust the rules a little bit to allow for outlying territories? And Sona actually met the Buddha and was able to chant very well and perfectly the chapter of the Eights, which is a collection in the Sutta Nipata. And the Buddha said, "Okay, you're obviously learned, a well-trained bhikkhu. What do you need?" And Sona made the request that the number be reduced to 5 in outlying territories. So in the West, what I've seen is we take 5 as the minimum number. And if it's actually a struggle to scrape together 5 bhikkhus or 5 bhikkhuni, then we hold to that number because we are very far from the Ganges Valley. But if we're in a situation where we're actually part of a large network of monastics, then we aim for the higher number. We aim for the highest number that's possible out of deference and respect for the Vinaya. And I know that where I ordained the first time in Abhayagiri, it was often possible to get together 20 monks, and they held that as the standard. They were always shooting for that, and nobody said, heck, we only need 5. They were trying to get 20 together because then they felt that would be like, we can. So let's try to honor this practice and really show that this monk is being invited into a very rich and large and well-structured community.
Right. And last question is, I'd like to ask Ajahn Stan a question. What is your preferred method of meditation? Well, Ajahn Stan just left the room, but I can answer for him. And it's wrong mindfulness. So that's what he normally likes to practice, which is he's extremely mindful, but without any ethics. So he normally is mindfully killing living beings.
Or with absolute concentration and focus and the cultivation of the iddhipada, he waits by a closed door for that door to be open so he can zip out. Yeah. He doesn't even want to do anything outside, really, but he will wait for hours in front of a door for that moment.
Yes, so he's got some parts right. He's working on the other ones. All right, and on that note, may Stan soon get enlightened, and may all beings get enlightened, including ourselves. And then we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See you next week on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time. Have a great weekend.